Man, I need to stop playing Baldur's Gate. I just want to make Baldur's Gate commanders for a little while. I don't know why. I get hyperfixated on random crap in this game, and here we are. So, like I said, I have been fixated on Baldur's Gate stuff, so if you see more Baldur's Gate commanders coming out, that's why. That's the reason why. So, I recently got to the part in the story where we learned a ton about Gale's backstory, and it made me want to go ahead and build a deck around him. So, I went ahead and looked at some of the options that are available for him, and it looks like Wizards, Tribal, Cantrips, and Spellslinger are the big options. I wanted to go ahead and run Token Landfall with him. Kinda, sorta. Gale, Waterdeep Prodigy, is a blue and 2 human wizard commander with an interesting ability. If you cast an instant or a sorcery card, you may go ahead and cast the other one from your graveyard. So if you cast an instant from your hand, you get a sorcery from your grave and vice versa. You still gotta cast them for their mana values, and you must always start with one of them from your hand, but otherwise it's a pretty straightforward commander. He would work really well as a Spellslinger commander, but we are going to be running him as a Tokens commander using his spell slinging abilities to generate them. So we have Master Chef as his background. Master Chef allows him to gain a 1/1 counter when he enters the board, and any of the tokens we summon will also gain a 1/1 counter. And importantly, for deck building restrictions, this gives us access to the Simic colors, which are basically the trust fund colors of Magic the Gathering. Now we will have access to all kinds of ways to generate advantage and plow through our opponents. So getting into the ways we're going to be generating tokens, let's first start out with our copies section. The cards we are going to use to generate extra versions of our cards to get further and further into our game plan. Beginning with the Spellslingery one of Swarm Intelligence, this card says whenever we cast an instant or a sorcery spell, we are allowed to copy it. So if we get both spells off of Gale, we will effectively get 4 spells off of Swarm Intelligence every turn per 1 card in our hand. Then we have Repudiate and Replicate, which can be used to counter an activated or triggered ability, or create a token copy of a creature. Mirage Mockery creates a token copy of a creature as well. Echoing Equation can turn all of our tokens into a copy of a creature, and Aggressive Biomancy can be used to create X tokens that are copies of any creature we control, and also gives it the ability to fight things, giving us more access to removal. We also need a way to try to break parity with our opponents, so we have an overrun effect in here with Candlekeep Inspiration. Until the end of turn, all creatures we control get power and toughness XX, where X is the number of cards we own in exile or in our graveyard that are instants or sorcery cards. This way, we will be able to use Gale to his fullest, no matter how many cards we get rid of with his ability, since he does force us to exile the spells we cast from the graveyard. This will track all of those and allow us to turn them into an end game slugfest. For this next section, though, I want to go ahead and focus on the Master Chef card we are using as our background. Now, this card does mean all of our tokens can get an extra 1/1 counter, and there is a great way to break parity with our opponents, and that is making those tokens so obscenely large they don't have any option but to block or die. So we are going to be adding in an 11-card proliferation engine so that we can stack up more and more counters on our cards. And of course, if these cards are cast with Gale, then all the better. We're going to begin with Vivisurgent's Insight, letting us draw 3 cards and proliferate. Carnivorous Canopy lets us blow up artifacts or enchantments or creatures with flying and proliferate if we do. Tezzeret's Gambit draws cards and proliferates. Fuel for the Cause counters spells and proliferates. And then Smell Fear allows us to fight and proliferate. Expand the Sphere allows us to choose between proliferation or ramping. Steady Progress allows us to draw and then proliferate. Serum Snare lets us bounce a non-land permanent, then proliferate. Reject Imperfection lets us counter a spell, then proliferate if it is mana value 3 or less. Contentious Plan gives us more access to draw and proliferation. And then Experimental Augury gives us access to deck manipulation and then proliferation on top of that. That was a lot of mouthfuls, because proliferate over and over and over again is not a fun thing to say. However, we do need to get into the basic token generation of the deck that does not count copies so that we can move on with things. And let's go ahead and get into that. We have 8 cards that generate tokens, and they are going to generate tokens via a combination of spell slinging and land falling. So let's begin with the landfall ones. Elf Sworn Giant makes a 1/1 elf whenever we landfall. Spore Mound makes a 1/1 sacrifice Temporling when we landfall, Zendikar's Royal makes a 2/2 elemental when we landfall, and Rampaging Baloths makes a 4/4 green beast upon landfall. Then on the spell slinging sides of things, we have Metallurgic Summonings to make an XX colorless construct when we cast an instant or sorcery spell. Shark Typhoon will make an XX flying shark when we do that. Talrin the Sky Summoner will make a flying blue drake when we do that, and the Murmuring Mystic will make a flying blue bird when we cast our instants or sorcery spells. So there's really the breadth of what the deck is trying to do. We want to cast lots of spells, and we want to drop lands on the board, though obviously the landfall section of the deck you're going to see more of when we get to the ramp section. But we do still need to talk about drawing cards, so let's go ahead and get into that. Even though some of our proliferation allows us to draw cards, we do still want to have a pretty beefy draw package on top of that. So we have 11 cards to let us dig through our deck, and if these cards are able to drop lands on our board, then all the better. Let's go ahead and get into all these. Urban Evolution lets us draw 3 cards and then drop a free land on the board. Eureka Moment lets us draw 2 cards and drop a free land on the board. Tatiova draws us cards when we drop lands on the board. Opt allows us to draw a card after scrying. Fleeting Distraction lets us draw a card after giving a creature -1/0. Quandrix Apprentice says whenever we cast an instant or a sorcery spell, we can look at the top 3 cards of our library and put a land from among them into our hand, giving us access to landfalls all game. Fact or Fiction lets us look at the top 5 cards of our deck, throw them into 2 piles when an opponent selects them, and hands those piles to us, and we pick which pile we want. Fact or Fiction's great for playing mind games with people, and it's just really good draw all around. Reach to the Mist lets us draw a card for 1 mana. Chart a Course lets us draw 2 cards for 2 mana and discard a card if we haven't attacked yet. And Shared Discovery lets us draw 3 cards as long as we can tap for untapped creatures we control. And Finale of Revelation allows us to turn all of our landfall into 1 giant draw spell that gives us no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Now, since we've got the draw out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to stop our opponents from winning the game before we get to the coveted other half of the deck's strategy in the ramp section. Much like with our draw section, we did have a handful of ways to control our opponent's board in the proliferate section of the deck, but we still need some cards that are dedicated solely to stopping our opponents from winning. So let's go ahead and begin with an Essence Scatter to counter creature spells, and let's go ahead and add some more counter spells. Refute can be used to counter spells and give us a draw and discard. Negate can be used to counter any non-creature spell, and Rewind can be used to counter any spell, and untap for lands for the follow-up spell cast from Gale as well. Then we have Broken Bond to blow up artifacts or enchantments and place a land from our hand onto the battlefield. Resculpt blows up artifacts or creatures, giving our opponent a token at the end. Repulsive Mutation can put a bunch of 1/1 counters on a creature, then counter a spell for us afterwards, as long as the creature has more power than our opponents have available mana. Return to Nature blows up an artifact, enchantment, or a card in a graveyard. Curse of Swine can be used to wipe away many cards from an opponent's board and is effectively a board wipe for creatures in our deck. And Storm the Citadel can be used to board wipe enchantments and artifacts from our opponents as well, giving all of our creatures 2/2 and a trigger when they punch our opponents. Finally, Keep Safe can be used to counter anything that targets our stuff and lets us draw a card after we do so. If we had a bit more of a budget, we would add in some cards like Wave Goodbye so that we could have access to strong board wipes that did not affect us. Cyclonic Rift would also be a good introduction here for your board wipes because it will be easy to get to the amount of mana Cyc Rift wants in a landfall style deck. But since we don't have access to those, we'll stick with Curse of Swine and blowing up their artifacts and enchantments. That said, let's go ahead and move into the ramp section where the other meat of the deck is. We're going to be running a 14-card ramp section, and anything that can get multiple lands is fantastic. Cards that allow us to draw and get lands are also fantastic, so that we can always have a hand that is constantly building up with Gale. Let's begin with Grow from the Ashes. This gets 1 land from our deck onto the battlefield, or 2 if we kicker it. Explore gets a land from our hand onto the battlefield and draws us a card, as does Growth Spiral. Search for Tomorrow can be used to get a basic land onto the battlefield untapped, and it can be used on turn 1 thanks thanks to the suspend mechanic. Font of Magic says that all of our instants and sorceries cost 1 less for every time we've had to cast Gale. Explosive Vegetation can be used to get 2 lands from our deck onto the battlefield, as can Harrow, but Harrow comes at the cost of sacking a land. Wizards of They will give all of our instants and sorcery spells another discount, and even has Myriad, so we can do some fun tricks with discounting cards at instant speed. Speaking of instant cards, we have Roiling Regrowth to get 2 lands onto the battlefield at the cost of a land, Circuitous Route to get 2 lands on the battlefield at the cost of being a high-costed sorcery. Planar Genesis is a power crept growth spiral and explore, letting us dig 4 cards deep and either pick up a card or throw a land onto the battlefield. Rampant Growth searches our library for a land and drops it on the battlefield. Joint Exploration lets us scry 2, then draw a card, then drop a land on the battlefield if we pay its kicker cost. And Cultivate grabs 2 lands from our deck, throws 1 onto the battlefield and 1 into our hand. After that, we have the lands in the deck, and we've got plenty of basics as we have plenty of ways to grab them out. 11 forests and 12 islands, along with our dual lands, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Simic Growth Chamber for bouncing utility lands, Vine Glimmer Snarl, Temple of Mystery for scrying, and an Overflowing Basin. Then what's perhaps a more important land section in the deck are our fetching lands, cards that can get double triggers off of our Landfall. Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, and Escape Tunnels all being copies of the same card. Blighted Woodland and Myriad Landscape both being able to grab any 2 lands from our deck and throw them onto the battlefield as long as they're basic. And Shire Terrace and Promising Vein both being able to act as regular lands and give us extra landfalls later on in the game. And a utility land in Pit of Offerings as well, so that we have ways to get rid of our opponent's graveyards, though obviously as you are upgrading the budget of this deck, adding a few more utility lands will certainly do you some favors. And that's basically everything in the deck. We want to drop lands on the battlefield, play lots of tokens, and get lots of value out of our instants and sorcery spells. Now all that's left to do is to show you how to pilot this thing. If I'm being honest, all that you need to make this deck function very well is some early game ramp and a single instant or sorcery pairing. In our opening hand, we have a pairing of an instant or sorcery with our Replicate or Repudiate, and we have Rampant Growth as well, and a Blighted Woodland, so we've got plenty of ways to dig into our deck. Let's draw our opening card, play a Temple of Mystery to scry, and we have a Forest. We got plenty of lands in our hand already, so we can throw that to the bottom of the deck and move into turn 2, where we get an Urban Evolution. Let's drop a Blighted Woodland on the board, tap 2, play that Rampant Growth, and go into our deck and dig out a Forest. Next turn, and we've drawn yet another forest, so let's go ahead and play that island right here, and we could play Gale, but I think the best thing to do would be to play the Circuitous Route and get 2 more lands out of the deck so that we can play Gale and Master Chef on the same turn. Let's go ahead and go into our library and grab ourselves a forest as well as an island so that we are set up for the following turns. Now that we are in turn 4, we can go ahead and pay 1, 2, 3, put Master Chef on the board and pay 1, 2, 3, and put Gale on the board with a 1/1 counter. We have no other moves to play this turn other than dropping a land on the battlefield for our turn, and we're just going to go ahead and pass into turn 5. We have a Search for Tomorrow, but let's go ahead and start utilizing what our deck is supposed to do. Let's pay 2 and resculpt one of our opponent's cards away, and that will allow us to recast Circuitous Route from our graveyard. Casting this is going to get 2 more lands out of our deck, and then the resculpt is going to be in our graveyard, able to be casted off of our Search for Tomorrow, which we will be suspending in order to play it for free on a following turn. Going into the next turn, and we have drawn another land. Let's go ahead and play that down and tap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for Urban Evolution to draw 1, 2, 3 and cast the Resculpt from our grave to get rid of a problematic creature. Now that we've done that, Urban Evolution is going to go into our grave and we get a free land off of it. I think we're going to go ahead and put the Pit of Offerings down to go ahead and harm one of our opponent's cards. After that, we're going to pretend we tapped our mana correctly, and we're going to hold on to the Reject Imperfection to block an opponent's spell so that we can proliferate here in a bit if we have to do that. Let's assume that our opponent played a spell that we are worried about. Let's Reject Imperfection the spell, and we don't have any mana to go into a free cast, so we will just move into the next turn, where Search for Tomorrow will go off and grab us a land. Moving into the next turn, we have Joint Exploration, which will be a fantastic card to play. Let's go ahead and pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's get Tatiova on the board with a 1/1 counter. Let's play a land for the turn to draw a card. And now let's go ahead and we have 5 mana that needs to be set aside. So we are going to pay 1/2 for Joint Exploration, which will allow us... Yeah, let's go ahead and pay it all. We'll pay everything into Joint Exploration so that we can get its ability and then pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to go in here and get Urban Evolution out from the graveyard. This is going to get rid of the Urban Evolution, but it's going to cause things to sequence kind of like this. Joint Exploration lets us scry 2 and draw 1. So let's go ahead and draw... I like both of these cards, actually, for what we're trying to do. So we're going to keep these... maybe not the Command Tower. No, we'll keep the Command Tower. We'll keep these. We'll scry 2, we will draw 1 and place a land onto the battlefield. The land will allow us to draw a card with Tatiova, and then the Urban Evolution will go off, drawing us 1, 2, 3, and letting us play a land as well. That'll be our Command Tower, which will draw us yet another card. This will put us this deep into our deck, and with plenty of mana to spare for following turns, and the Joint Exploration now goes into the graveyard as an instant that we will have access to in a following turn. Moving into turn 8, and looking at our hand, we have lots and lots of options we can play. Let's go ahead and see. Eureka Moment is an instant, and we can get a sorcery out of our grave by playing it, so let's pay 1, 2, 3, 4. We play the Eureka Moment, and the sorcery we are going to grab is... I'd like it to be Circuitous Route, but it looks like it's going to have to be Search for Tomorrow for now, which will cost us 2 more mana, but get us a card for free. The Eureka Moment will... Let's see, Search for Tomorrow has to go off first, which also reminds me I did the Urban Evolution backwards. Apologies for that. Search for Tomorrow drops its land onto the board, drawing us a card. It goes away forever, and then the Eureka Moment goes off, drawing us 2 cards, dropping a land onto the battlefield, drawing us a card with Tatiova. We still haven't played a land for the turn, so let's go ahead and pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Drop Rampaging Balos on the board, drop a Terramorphic Expanse on the board to draw a card and create a 4/4 token. And remember, these 4/4 tokens are coming out stronger than normal thanks to our Master Chef ability. These are 5/5 tokens. Let's crack the Terramorphic Expanse to go into our library and grab ourselves another land. I think we'll get an island, so we always have access to blue mana on our opponent's turns. That is going to generate another 5/5 token, thanks to Master Chef. So we have 5 mana available. We've drawn plenty of cards, and I think the best thing we can do here is hold up mana to defend our board. So we have 1, 2, 3 counter spells. We have Expand the Sphere. Let's go ahead and say that counter target or create. Let's go ahead and create a thing. No, that means we'll have to hold on to a lot of mana. Actually, you know what? We can do that. We can pay 1, 2, 3. And let's go ahead and do Repudiate and Replicate. Let's get a copy of Rampaging Balos on the board and throw this into the graveyard, not casting anything here. We can defend ourselves with just a Repulsive Mutation by just casting it and making an opponent pay 7 mana for a card. That's still a worthwhile counter spell to have access to. So let's go ahead and use that on our opponent's turn. Counter a spell, protecting our board state, so that when we move into turn 9, oh boy, we can do all kinds of stuff with this hand. We have instants in our in there that we can cast. So let's go ahead and do 1, 2, 3. Yep, 3. We're going to cast the Cultivate. Now we can go into our graveyard and yank an instant out. The instant we are going to get is going to be Eureka Moment. Now that we've got Eureka Moment on the stack, it will draw us 2 cards and throw a land on the battlefield. We don't have a land here to throw down, so that is perfectly fine. I would have liked the extra triggers, but we don't get those triggers today. Cultivate will go into our library and grab us 2 lands. So let's go ahead and get a forest out and a forest to our hand. That forest comes down, spawning 2 tokens that are both 5/5s, ready to swing at our opponents. And then we can play another land to get more draws off of that. Let's go ahead and play that land, spawning 2 more tokens. We have the ability to lethal a player on the board right now with everything that is available. But we can still go further. We got plenty of counter spells in our hand. We're in a really good spot right now, I think. In this scenario, I think what we do is we pay 3, and we Tezzeret's Gambit to add an extra 1/1 counter to every creature on the board, just making them that much more potent. And draw some extra cards to see what we can hold on to so we can sculpt a perfect hand. There's an Evolving Wilds for a follow-up turn, which will be perfect to use. We still have plenty of mana, so let's go ahead and pay 2. Let's Contentious Plan. Let's go ahead and add an extra 1/1 counter onto each of these tokens once more, make them that much bigger and more threatening. And our board is starting to look awfully dangerous. That draws us another card. That's a Roiling Growth. We can use that on our opponent's turn to generate more stuff. I'm going to be honest, I think at this point we save up everything in our hand. We don't necessarily need the big draw 3 Proliferate from that as we pass our turn. We don't need the snare, and we probably don't need the chart, of course. And remember, throwing these into the graveyard just means we can cast them for free with Gale. If our opponent does anything we don't like, we can pay 4, rewind their spell, untap our lands from rewinding our spell, and go into our graveyard and cast a sorcery instantaneously. And I'm going to be honest, we could cast Tezzeret's Gambit to get bigger creatures. We could get Expand the Sphere to get more blockers. Like, we could do anything we want here. We've got a giant board of creatures that can attack our opponents and plenty of land to cast extra counterspells if we need. In our hand alone, we have a counterspell, a card that can blow up any enchantment an opponent plays, free landfalls with Roiling Regrowth, and we've got the ability to do this all on our opponent's turns. I'd say we are in a fantastic spot to be in a dominant position on the board, and we are very, 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 like, obscenely far ahead with lands. Whew! If you are looking to upgrade the deck past its $15 variant, then there's a lot of room for improvement in this build. I mentioned that the board wipe section of the deck can be improved by a Wave Goodbye, but you could also add in an Ezreal's Predation to give you access to lots of tokens that will get bigger with Master Chef and fight even better afterwards. Doppelgang can also make some great tokens for you, as well as Avenger of Zendikar and Scoot Swarm as ways to threaten your opponents with ending the game with tokens. Next, you can have a Dika Fractal Theorist to make tokens as well, and you can power up those tokens with a Kami of Whispered Hopes. And if you want more ways to make your mana efficient for you, adding in low-cost cards like Nature's Claim and Offer You Can't Refuse is a fantastic way to make it easier to get your double casts off. You can also add in more cards with the rewind mechanic like Frantic Search to give you easy access to the mana to use Gale's ability. Having some more mana efficient ramp is also going to be helpful with Nature's Lore and 3 visits, and Entis Restoration will go a long way once you have your first set of big creatures out for the Entis Restoration to see. Getting some better modal removal with cards like Beast Within will also help you a lot, and making sure your mana curve is nice and fluffy with cards like Lotus Cobra will let you weave your spells together perfectly well. Add in some MDFCs like Balaged Recovery so you have access to recursion stapled onto lands, and you'll have a wonderful, wonderful time. And finally, this next one is a personal ask of mine, but I want one of you to come up with a design for Gale that involves utilizing slimes against humanity. This in a Gale deck feels like a no-brainer. Cut all of the sorceries out of the main deck. Make sure that you have nothing but cards like Counterspell and Offer You Can't Refuse and Nature's Claim as easy access instants, and just spam out tokens with Slime Against Humanity, getting to double and triple up on it constantly throughout your game. And the fact that Gale will see the slimes in the graveyard and the slimes track themselves whether they are exiled or not feels like it is a match made in heaven for this kind of deck. Let me know what you guys come up with in the comment section below, and if one of you makes something that I think is just absolutely fantastic, I may even feature it as a deck on this channel. That said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and hey, I'm working on the aesthetics of the channel a little bit if you've noticed some changes here and there, so maybe give me some feedback in the comments below. Let me know how you feel things are going. That said, let me know in the comment section below any feedback you got. I appreciate it. As always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full-time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full-time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.